Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Brett. I am the VP of Marketing at Flipside. I've been in the crypto space for almost a decade now, and I think today we are closer to kind of mainstream adoption than we've ever been. We have ETFs, more regulatory clarity, stable coins being used across the world, etc. But I also feel that in many ways, every time we take 2 steps forward, we also take 3 steps back. If you look at doing a quick search on headlines, this all happened in the last quarter or so. The OM token crashing over 90%. You got Kaido, spreading InfoFi. Laudio, the initial attention offering, capturing about 70% of the crypto Twitter mindshare, and then in a month losing 88% of their token value. These hype cycles, pump and dump cycles, seem to continually happen. In fact, over 50% of tokens have failed since 2021. And if you look at it, and if you do some research, actually the amount of tokens that have actually accrued value since 2021 is even lower. And so I feel like, and I believe many of you feel the same way, that like these constant pump and dump hype cycles is seeming continue to grow and take over what we talk about within crypto. When I joined crypto 10 years ago, this is what inspired me. Real-world use cases, supply chain, digital identity, stable coins for cross-border payments, voting systems, et cetera. And I feel like we have established and expanded the amount of real-world use cases today around DeFi and other things. But more and more, we see focus and time and percentage retention on building hype, purely building hype, and not actually thinking about what the actual use cases and value is underneath it. And this is not a story about bad actors. I feel like this is a system that we've built that continually promotes this type of behavior. Why is that? A lot of builders, great idea, start a project. The first thing they need is they need to seek funding. That expectation for liquidity and returns is incredibly quick in crypto compared to other traditional markets. That creates a forcing function to launch a token. That ends up forcing people to start building hype and focus on building narrative and building hype. That creates the need to create a large social following. You launch the token, investors dump the token drops, rinse and repeat, right? And I think a lot of this is built on kind of these 2 core phenomenons. Number one is that hype leads to high FDV. There's too close of an association between value of a token and how much hype or attention it has. Second is that many times retail becomes the exit liquidity. And so I think something to be said is that this impact is not only negative from a financial standpoint, but really the more important impact this has is on the degradation of trust across not only within crypto, but outside of crypto. Too often I go to my friends outside of crypto and I said, I'm in the crypto space. I've been a proud part of the crypto ecosystem for 10 years. And they're like, all I see are scams. All I see is not real world use cases being built. And I think it's time for us as an ecosystem, as an industry, and especially today when we talk about growth and on-chain growth, to start to change that narrative and change that perspective. So how do we do that? I think the focus on-chain growth is a really important one. We need to start looking at what's actually happening on-chain. What are the activities happening on-chain? What value is being created? And one key element of this is thinking about it from a user standpoint. Now, one specific metric is looking at high-value users for networks for chains. And this goes into how you evaluate ecosystems, how you look at networks, how you evaluate projects. There's about less than 5% of users today across crypto that are classified as high-value users. But 70% of overall protocol value is being driven by those high-value users. And so there's a disproportionate amount of value being created with a very small subset of people within the ecosystem. Now, we've seen this as part of Flipside, and just a little bit about Flipside. We have been helping protocols achieve sustainable growth for the last number of years. We work with 40 plus protocol partners, and what we do is look at what are the activities, what are the segments of users that create lasting value for ecosystems. Not just short-term hype, but lasting value. And at the center of our philosophy is this idea of user scores. And so user scores is a calculation based off of 20 plus on-chain behaviors of the value that users are creating for the ecosystem from a spread of 0 to 15. And what we find is that there is a double inflection point in this, where as users cross this 4+ user mark, score mark, you'll see that the majority of the users aren't more than 4+ users. But a majority of the value being created to ecosystems are created by those users that are 4+. And so we call that the double inflection point. Now you can start to use this to look at and evaluate phenomenon, trends, and ecosystems. So we did some analysis using scores on the recent meme coin pump. And kind of to be expected, what you see is that 40% of meme coin users are from 0 to 1. This is not even 4, 0 to 1. Only 0.71% of meme coin users actually did any meaningful DeFi activity after the initial kind of speculation on the meme coins themselves. And 93% of meme coin users who actually ended up staking are just from 9 wallets. So sorry, the value, 93% of the value staked after the initial meme coin cup are just from 9 wallets. And you see all this activity happening in meme coin, crypto Twitter talking about meme coin phenomenon, et cetera, but the lasting value is just not there. You can also take user scores and look at airdrop distribution. This is a very common activation vehicle for most ecosystems and most chains. About 40% of airdrop value, as well as recipients, are going to users who are 0 to 3 on the scores. And you can imagine afterwards what happens with those users. Not much. In addition, past behavior, as the adage goes, past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. And so if you look at wallets across the spectrum, if a particular wallet or user has dumped an airdrop in the past, there's an 83% chance that they're going to dump an airdrop in the future. And so it's important to know when you're looking at airdrop distribution, what your users are doing, what have they done. And so that, and on the flip side of that, no pun intended, 10+ users stake at rates 10 to 20x those of lower scores. So if you understand user behavior and you know who's in your airdrop distribution pool, and you can target those users that are going to stick around, that airdrop is going to be much more effective than not. So we've summarized this into a playbook that we call the intelligence-driven growth playbook. And this is not something that we necessarily want to coin or own completely. This is something we want to share with the ecosystem and kind of build together, because we believe that we need to start a movement for everybody to start thinking about what creates sustainable growth instead of pure hype. The playbook is actually pretty simple conceptually. You take those user scores, and it doesn't have to be the user score mechanism that we've come up with. Anybody can come up with their own user scoring methodology. Identify high-value users. Uncover insights about what activities those high-value users are doing, what protocols they're interacting with, what behaviors and what activities are they doing on chain. And then you optimize activations, you optimize airdrops to maximize the value for your users based on that activity. And that, what we've seen time and time again, is what leads to sustainable growth. A couple of quick examples. So we worked with Avalanche on this. And what we found is that all of their, in this case, 8+ users follow this very similar trajectory or user journey. They bridge, and then they swap, and then they stake, and then they deposit to an LP. And once you get to the deposit phase on the LP, they're sticky. They stick around. And you see that they're not going to be volatile when the price fluctuates. They're going to remain there. They create the foundation for what creates sustainable value for that ecosystem. What you also notice is that some of the top, more popular protocols like a Trader Joe or Beefy in this case, actually have a lot smaller percentage of high-value users than maybe lesser-known protocols like Varroa, right? And so it's interesting to see because when you think about incentivizing behavior in the ecosystem, you actually want to select and target the protocols that are creating longer-lasting value based on those user scores. And so one of the things is that this is not necessarily easy to do, right? In order to get that level of insight, you need to have on-chain data, you need to see cross-chain data, you need to be able to analyze that data, to draw conclusions from that data, to then target and create campaigns and incentives based on that data. And so we've actually, as Flipside, made this easier for everyone. On the AI train here. So yesterday, we announced the beta launch of our Flipside Growth MCP product. For those of you that maybe are not aware of MCP, and this is something that's actually relatively new, it's a model context protocol, which in short is an API for AI. It allows LLM engines like Claude, ChatGPT, et cetera, to connect to data sources like Flipside and enhance the analysis that they can do behind the scenes using that data. And so we've taken our Flipside Growth foundation, our AI engine, and now connected it to Claude. So directly in Claude, you can prompt and you can query and you can ask questions and generate dashboards, generate insights, like in this case, Solana Elite User Analytics. It has all the embedded proprietary user scoring methodology that we have, and understand what's happening across these various blockchains. On top of that, we're adding the ability to automate the creation of activations and journeys and quests from this as well. So when we talk about the future where you have automated AI agents running campaigns for you, we're pretty close to that today. If you guys want to take a look, by the way, we got the Flipside team around. We're going to be in that resting area. And so if you want to take a look at this live, we're happy to show you what this looks like. So I went through that relatively fast. So just to kind of close off, and it can open up to questions, et cetera. What I want to put out as a challenge to everyone here today, and I think this Onchain Growth Summit is a great place to start talking about this, is let's create a movement. Let's create a movement where we move towards sustainable growth, where when on crypto Twitter, we're not talking about just like what has the most hype, what has the most short-term attention, but rather highlighting what protocols, what networks, what projects are doing things that are leading to long-term growth for the ecosystem as a whole. Let's talk more about use cases. Let's talk more about methodologies. Let's talk more about best practices. We've created a Telegram community called the G-Squared Growth Collective to continue these conversations kind of in real time. And so if you want to join the Telegram, go ahead and scan that QR code. We have 250 plus members in the collective, sharing ideas, talking about different growth-related topics, all under this kind of North Star of pointing towards sustainable growth in the ecosystem. And yeah, looking forward to the conversations throughout today with everyone here. I think the topics and the things we're talking about are the right ones here, and looking forward to continuing to grow this on-chain growth movement that we've created. So with that, I will close it off. Thank you. Yeah, we can do Q&A.
So I love the aspiration of sustainable growth, and it seems like every layer 1 and every layer 2 tries to do the right thing and then realizes they don't have enough users, and they go down the dark, scary path over and over again. Do you have any indication that there's enough users in the market and that the market is growing enough that many chains can have sustainable growth? Or is this more likely to lead to sort of a Darwinian sort of situation where, like previously, there's a couple major chains that drive everything and everyone else falls to the wayside? Is the possibility of this flourishing multi-chain ecosystem realistic?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's imperative that we all have a grow the pie mentality instead of a fixed pie mentality. And I think for many of us, probably us in this room, we have that grow the pie mentality. We need to talk about use cases that continue to attract new users into the ecosystem rather than vampire attacking the users that are already here. And I think that's a collective thing that we all need to build together towards that future, that many chains are thriving. There's new users being brought in from many different chains, and not having this kind of fixed pie of users where we just attack each other, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the aspiration, but in reality, do you think that's possible, and what will actually occur?
I think it's I believe it's possible. I absolutely believe it's possible, but I think it's about real-world use cases. That's why I led in with kind of that in mind, is if we stick to the same use cases that we have today, whether it's only DeFi, it's swapping, it's whatnot, then yeah, we'll end up in a future where it is not enough users and we all have to fight each other for it. But I feel like if we focus on the use cases that continue to bring in new users into the ecosystem, we can build a future where everyone's thriving together.
Does the data that you've collected indicate that that is realistic and feasible?
So the data is based on the present. So the data is not going to tell us what's going to happen in the future, right? I think it's incumbent for all of us to kind of build that future. Today, a lot of the activity is based on DeFi activities. And yeah, there's a little bit of fixed pie thinking in that, for sure. And so, yeah, to answer, if that's what you're asking, the here and now, that's what the data shows.
Here and now, it's a vampire attack world we live in.
I agree.
However,
I agree.
you're trying to move.
Yeah, all of us need to build that future together where it's not a fixed pie mentality.
Cool.
Will this take over everyday jobs? Will we see everyone in the world doing this? Are there enough tokens for billions of users to take part in this? And what's the end goal here? Are we just going to all become bettors and gamblers?
I hope not. So the question for everyone and the observation, I guess, is today a lot of what drives activity in crypto is quote unquote speculation and quote unquote gambling, et cetera. I think to a certain extent I would agree with that statement. Right? I think there's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of people trying to figure out how to take advantage of those hype cycles and come out on top. And at the cost of dumping on retail or dumping on the people who are not as far along from an understanding of the space, they take advantage of that. And I think if we don't proactively think about and work on what are sustainable use cases that are creating real user value for the future, there is potential that that's going to be more and more what we see, right? And I think a lot of kind of the headlines and in recent days kind of indicate there is a potential. There are two paths we can take. Either one where we all come together and figure out what are opportunities for sustainable growth, or it could devolve into just constant speculation and pump and dumps.
Skills.
Yeah, I think that's a potential use case. How do you use token incentives to spur positive education? I think that's interesting.
So that the life could be the life of a human being, the token, rather than 3 years. Sorry.
No, you speak in the.
I'm so shy. Sorry.
It's okay. I can repeat the question.
The average
Yeah.
life of a token is 3 years, let's say 4 years. So how can we make sure that it lasts maybe the life of a human being? And how can we get everybody in the world to take part in it and not think of it as just gambling?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the inherent value assigned to each token, right? And each token needs to have real-world value that's being created. Exactly, and it's on a token-by-token basis.
Sorry, I'm really shy.
That's fine. I love your kimono and your socks.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for a great presentation.
Thank
But
you.
I have a question. So this is all super great. However, there is a kind of a social contract currently between protocols and users, like hype users. Yeah, so we give you an airdrop and you create a kind of activity for us, this hype activity, because protocols want to show to investors or potential investors, look, we have 500,000 users, this is amazing. We have so many transactions on our chain. And then we launch and all of that dumps. So, and from this perspective, you have only 5% of users who actually create any kind of lasting value. How to combine these two paradigms in a way that you do not alienate like all the users, because crypto users are so sensitive. You're like, you hate us, you don't love us anymore. We will go to some other people who give us an airdrop.
Sure. No, I think it's a fair point. I think it's about education, not only to in the protocols and like about what protocols do, but actually education across the board. If VCs start to invest in projects with a focus on sustained value, rather than looking at how many crypto Twitter, followers they have, you'll see a difference. You'll see a change, a shift. Sure. Correct. Yeah, and that'll change the paradigm to an extent, right? And then that creates an incentive for protocols to find more long-term user stickiness, and that'll change incentive design to not be focused on driving hype, people dumping afterwards. So you know that's going to happen. So how do you create incentive mechanisms that create lasting value, right? It'll start to drive differences in behavior. So I think it's about education across the board, not only in certain pockets, not only in growth teams, but with VCs, with exchanges, et cetera, et cetera. My last project, we were going through a TG, talking to a centralized exchange. The first question they asked us is like, can you grow your follower account? And I'm like, why is that a requirement for being listed? And so like, I think that's an important thing we need to change across the board.
This comes from the short cycles and expectations that you will give money. We're going to cover it on the
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And like, I want to spur these discussions. I think these are the important discussions that us in this room and beyond need to have, is like, how do we change some of the mechanisms that are driving more towards like short-term, results and short-term outcomes to be more about long-term and sustainable outcomes. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Brett.